Welcome to TechX 2025 and our talk on AI is coming for you. I'm Nancy Ostin. I'm the director of IEEE at Kapanu, and it's my pleasure to welcome with us today Steve Andriol, who has had an extensive career in technology and business and academia. He has been the director of cybernetics technology office at DARPA, very exciting. He's held senior position roles as chief technology officer and senior vice president, Safeguard Scientific, and he is currently professor at Villanova University, where he teaches artificial intelligence and machine learning, emerging business technologies, and innovation and entrepreneurism, and has also previously held professorships at Drexel and George Mason University. He's got extensive background on digital transformation and artificial intelligence and lots of articles, and just told me he was writing a book, so that's interesting. So really excited to have you with us, Steve. This talk today about AI is coming for you and learning and generative AI, and will they replace the workers, many more workers than we expect? I think exciting topic and something people worry about, but you also said very hopeful. So thank you, Steve, for joining us today.
Well, thank you. I think it's important for us to understand that things are really, really fundamentally changing. And I think some of us, maybe a lot of us, are underestimating the impact that AI is going to have on our professional lives and our personal lives as well. So what I'm going to do in the next half an hour or so is going to go through sort of AI. Many of us understand what's involved there, but I want to emphasize the impact AI is having on business processes and business models. And then I'm going to talk about how we should all prepare for this, right? We should prepare for this in terms of our education, our professional, um, basically our professional education, our academic education, because if we don't prepare, and this is kind of the argument, if we don't prepare, we will in fact be left behind. And I think many of us don't want to think in those terms, but I think, and the evidence is starting to suggest that the impact's going to be profound and it's going to be sooner than we expect. So let me get into it. Um, and just talk about sort of um, preparation. The next slide is kind of funny because it talks about it's coming faster than anyone thinks, and I'll talk about some of the data and some of the evidence around that. So this is the front end to okay, we're going to get hit pretty hard. So how do we prepare for that? So it's coming faster than you think. And let me just give you some. This is an outline of the presentation I'll be giving. It's a question of readiness, which I think is important for all of us. It's a question of acknowledging, number two, the impact that AI, machine learning, and Gen AI, generative AI, will have on the professions and therefore on our preparation to deal with the changes in the professions, and then how we can prepare. And I think that's probably perhaps the most important part of this presentation. So, are you ready? My suspicion is that probably not. Um, I think that there's this sort of debate going on as to whether or not this will have real impact, and white collar knowledge, so-called knowledge workers, can never be completely replaced by AI, and that there's always something that's unique about what humans bring to the table. And I'm here to suggest that that's a lie. I think there are many business processes, many engineering processes, many processes in general that are vulnerable to displacement. And I think for us to think otherwise is a mistake in our professions, in our lives for that matter. I think it's going to be, as they say in the first bullet there, it's a direct hit. It'll take a few years, but we're not talking about 10 years. We're talking about 3 to 5. You can pick a profession and you can look at business processes, especially so-called deterministic business processes, otherwise known as well-bounded supervised learning. This is really just tantamount to, I mean, you're teeing up replacement. And I think one of the interesting things all of us should be thinking about is there going to be a kind of willingness to replace? And the answer to that is it depends where you sit. So if you're sitting in the professions that may be displaced, you're not happy about this. But if you're sitting in a boardroom trying to control costs, you love this. So I think it's very much to think about, it's very important to think about where you sit in terms of the impact. It's going to obliterate an enormous number of white collar jobs. I'm not going to read the slides, you can look at them yourselves. But I think that we really need to be open to that and kind of accepting of that. And I think, as I go through this, you'll get a sense of this. One of the things that's important about this is this idea of, let me go back. I think I skipped a slide. Yeah, I think I skipped. Let me go back a little bit and just go back this. Yeah, here we go, right here. I think that everyone's underestimating the impact, and I think one of the things that's really important about all this is the assumption that people make when they claim that humans cannot be replaced, is that humans are really good at what we do. And I think that's a really interesting way to frame an argument about displacement. The assumption's always been that machines can't replace humans because they bring something truly unique to decision-making processes. And you see in the second slide there, the second bullet there, when you think about some of the companies, I mean, 23andMe has just filed for bankruptcy. We all know about the ongoing problems at Boeing. Some of the problems are not just because people may be unethical. Some of the problems are because they make really bad mistakes based on their faulty analysis of data. And I think, again, this is where we can imagine that AI is really going to have some dramatic impact. One of the things that's important, I think, to all of us to recognize is that there's kind of a process, or it's a continuum that AI, in fact, today, and I use it well, I use it a lot right now. It will assist us and it will move toward being our partner. And then it will become, this is the displacement part, it will lead us, right? Become our, in effect, our bosses. So, for example, professors may claim that they never use AI to, for example, develop a syllabus, but they do. And that's assistance, right? And pretty soon, not too far from now, I think many professors will be saying, okay, here's my objective for a course, build the syllabus, find the readings, right? Develop the exercises, the exams, if they were have any, all of that. And I think that movement is happening as we speak. Same thing is happening in lots of the business disciplines, marketing, for example, finance. It's I can assist you in doing equity analysis, for example, in finance. But the next step is, can I partner with you now to help me make the right investments? So this is an important way to think about. That's a takeaway. We're underestimating about this role, this continuum between assistance, partnership, and leadership. This is a short list. Okay, now this list comes from a lot of analysis, and I hope you can all see this, and I hope it's on a large screen, you can see this. But this comes from an analysis that was done by Oxford University, McKinsey, uh, uh, Deloitte, a lot of companies are sort of looking at these areas. These are the targets. I mentioned before, these are very well-bounded, deterministic, right? So when you look at this list, you think, yeah, these are sort of interesting, well-boundable, as I said. What do tax preparers do? Do we need a tax industry? No, we really don't, right? I mean, the data is well available. We have the rules by which you pay taxes. We understand exemptions. We understand all that kind of thing. That's an example of a well-bounded area. Approving a loan, no, you don't need people. Admitting people to a university, no, you really don't need people for that. Cashiers, no, you don't. It goes on and on. You can see the list. And I think that's important when we think about what are we really talking about here when we talk about displacement. This is, by the way, a short list. Now we can move into some areas that are kind of fun, right? So if you look at top left, you'll see a lot of kind of autonomous vehicles in agriculture. That's an exploding area for some employment reasons, but it's an exploding area. You'll see that the umpire right now they're experimenting with strike zones and getting rid of umpires in Major League Baseball. It's already happening in football in Europe and places like that. In the middle, medical imaging, that's happening already. Far right with that's a strange object, strange whatever it is. That's an example of images that can be created with tools like Midjourney, DALI. People are doing this all the time. You can see the Pope down there. That was fake news, so to speak. That was misinformation. Fooled an awful lot of people. Manufacturing, of course, is being automated. Bottom right is in fact avatars delivering the news. So when you think about some of these application areas, it's pretty broad and it's growing. And I think that's an important aspect of all of this. It's the speed, it's the trajectory, and it's also the application areas. And I could go on the previous slide. In fact, let's go back and look at it just for a second. The previous slide lists all of these. And again, as I mentioned, this is a short list. For those of you, for example, who are musicians, there are some of these tools like Loudly, for example, that enable you to create music in ways we never thought before, was possible before. If you want to try that, you should just try that as an example. Generative AI, creating new music that can be, used for various purposes. Same thing's true of an application called Sora, Sora, which is amazing for creating video. So it's text to video, and that's extraordinarily creative. The same thing has to do with photographs and what can be done there. If you're a photographer, you can upload things into some of these tools, and then you can edit them, right, by adding or changing the backgrounds or whatever you might want to do. Lots and lots of things are changing very, very quickly. So we'll keep going with that theme, and therefore, how do you prepare for this? So back to this, the next slide. Let's go briefly into what we're talking about in terms of machine learning and Gen AI, generative AI. And I'll keep probably saying Gen AI. So many of you know that this is what it looks like, right? And you've probably in the previous talks, and you'll hear more about this. This is sort of a simple picture of what's going on. So AI leads to machine learning, deep learning, and then generative AI. And I'm not going to talk about, the artificial general intelligence, the AGI, which is moving us toward, in some people's minds, the singularity. I don't believe that's a real threat, but lots of people do. And if it is a threat, it's probably, we're looking at decades. Will give us time to manage it, perhaps, or at least think about it, or maybe even regulate it, although regulation seems to have fallen through the cracks, at least in the United States. But anyway, you can see what these look like. And generative artificial intelligence, new content, and the key word there is new: audio, code, images, videos, with various tools that we're familiar with, and that growing tool. So we'll see over time, what's going on here. But I think that it's important to be thinking about this whole movement toward generative AI and solving problems with tools that previously were unable to solve in many, many ways. Okay, so let's move on. Now, algorithms, right? These are machine learning algorithms. And what's really interesting to me about algorithms, and I'll talk very briefly about supervised, unsupervised learning, is the fact that we create these algorithms, but they become embedded in these applications. So we're really not looking at selecting them. We don't have to select them, but understand that they're driving many of these recommendations that might be made, right? Do I approve or deny a loan? Simple, really simple, well-bounded, supervised learning application. What would I use for that? Linear regression. I call in certain amounts of data which represent the variables, and I go from there. This distinction between supervised and unsupervised learning and reinforcement learning is really important. So one of the dirty little secrets about AI is that many of the applications are in supervised learning, and many of the algorithms that are being used are linear regression, right? So I mean, they work very well and they solve lots of problems. Unsupervised learning is really interesting when you're trying to look for relationships that may be hidden. So, for example, do I approve a loan or not? The example I just gave. One of the things that was discovered is that people who have a problem with chronic lateness, that was a relationship that was identified in unsupervised learning, tend to be bad credit risks. Who knew? That's the kind of discovery you can make in unsupervised learning, where you're basically looking at a huge pile of data and looking for relationships. So this whole idea of algorithms is important. I'll come back to that in terms of, do we create them in terms of preparation for what I'm seeing as arguing as a kind of tsunami of displacement, or what? And we'll talk about that. This, I think, is really the future, this idea of generative AI. New text, new video, new images, new code, new music, new speech, new 3D. If you haven't played with these tools, you really need to do so, because I mentioned only one loudly, but there's for music. There's so many of these tools that will help generate new text and video, for example, new images. I mentioned a few of those tools as well. But things are really changing. And of course, prompt engineering is the way we get into these things, and being able to do text to video, text to images, text to music, as well as using the tools themselves, is quite amazing. I'll talk more about agentic AI in a moment, but let me just mention now at this point that this whole idea around agents, intelligent agents to perform many tasks, is, I believe, and lots of people believe, is going to revolutionize the way we think about generative AI, right? And I think that we need to be aware of this. We need to be thinking about these applications using agentic AI. And I think those who are especially worried about being displaced need to be thinking about, well, I can prepare for this impact by really becoming a kind of expert in agentic AI. Let me just say at this point, which I think is really important, this whole idea of displacement, this whole idea of the role that we will play as professionals as this displacement grows, I think is related strongly to our ability to master the tools, right, that are the source of our displacement. So what I mean to say by that, and I'll talk more about that in a few minutes, is it's really important for us to take a look at the tools out there that enable the creation of new, for example, code, right? So it's not just going to be programming the way we thought about it before. It's going to be traditional programming. It's going to be programming with these tools. So if you think about coding, for example, the extent to which all of us can prepare ourselves for displacement is not about, okay, I'm going to become a better, faster Python programmer. No, it's about the extent to which I can marry AI and software engineering using various codes, right? Like Devon AI, for example. Various coding techniques, platforms. I think that's sort of the new role many of us will have to play. So it's not just I'm going to be a better, faster programmer. It's rather I know how to optimize these tools to become a better, faster programmer. And I think without those tools, you'll be left behind for sure. So let's keep going. Um, Generative models, right? So I've been talking a lot about generative AI. I think understanding these models, which really you should think of them as algorithms, is really important for all of us. Again, these models tend to be embedded in applications. So stable diffusion, text to image creation, for example, uses GANs, which is basically adversarial training. So a couple of neural nets fight each other to see which one's going to generate the best image. I think it's important to understand that these algorithms, these models in the case of Gen AI, are driving the outcomes that we're looking for. So new music, new images, new video, whatever it happens to be, a new marketing plan. It's very important to understand how these things work and how they're proceeding in terms of enabling these outcomes. So preparation. So I've been talking about the impact that AI, in particular machine learning, and generative AI are going to have on the professions, especially the knowledge-based professions. I think it's undeniable that that's going to happen. I see examples of this all the time. I work with companies who are displacing people already. There are some areas like coding, like marketing, like medical imaging, which are having a real impact already on sort of recruiting and training and the like. So if I'm right, and all this is true, that the impact is going to be considerable over time, how do we prepare for this? And especially if you're a student, and many of you are students that are listening to me right now, many are not perhaps, but if you're a student, there's a lot of things you should be thinking about now, because we're not just talking about your futures in the next 2 to 3 years or even 5. We're talking about your futures over the next 5 to 10 to 15. We're talking about careers. So the question is, how do you prepare for a world that is going to be fundamentally reinvented, if not reimagined, by, in particular, generative AI? How do you do that? What kinds of things do you think about? What kinds of things do you invest in? So let's do this. Let's go through these 2 career options. You can create or you can apply AI. And that's an important distinction you should think about right now. So I'll pause for 5 seconds. Create or apply, right? So option number 1, creating AI tools and platforms. This is a really interesting career path for lots of us. We can be on the creation side. We can build the mid journeys, the stable diffusions, the chat GPTs, the large language models, the small language models, the agents. We can build all that sort of thing, and I think that's important for all of us in terms of our futures, our careers, for sure. So take a look at that list. It's a pretty long list. You'll see agentic AI, which is always there. Agentic AI is important whether you're creating or applying. But there's a list of things that we can consider, all of us, you can consider in terms of kind of career management. These are kinds of things you might want to become, might want to do. Again, create, right? That's one side of this. There are other sides. And the other side is applications, right? So do you want to apply these? Do you want to become an application engineer? Do you want to become a Gen AI application engineer, robotics engineer? And now you're solving problems with the tools that are perhaps created by your colleagues, but now you're taking the tools and you're applying them to a variety of problems, right? So next generation robotics, some amazing things are happening right there in that area in particular. Data science, data engineering, you can see the list yourself. And there's a huge distinction between this creation and this application that I want everyone to think about. Because people will say things like, well, there'll be plenty of jobs because there's going to be a lot of people that will be writing the code to enable, and listen to what I just said, writing the code to enable the creation of new platforms. Maybe, but if we go back, how's code going to be written, right? We've already talked about that. So a little bit different. Maybe it's a hardware engineer. Maybe you want to get into chips, optimizing that. Maybe you want to get into, the chips that are the architectures, I should say, that consume less energy, right? And that speaks to sustainability. That was the argument that DeepSeek was making not long ago, just a month or so ago, that we can do this faster and cheaper with less energy. Maybe. Well, that's a field. Fine. You can do that. You can create. That's on the creation side. Let's go back now to applications. So applications is different, right? It also requires the strong domain knowledge. So applying it for what? So what are robots going to do? Whether small, large robots going to do? Are they going to fight in battles? Are they going to be the things that we send into to measure radioactivity? Are they going to look for whatever? There are applications now that they're going in looking at infrastructure, whether it's water or electric infrastructure. So I mean, I think these are sort of the domains that we have to think about. And let me just suggest something to you here, which is I think kind of important. This idea of this idea of the underpinnings, right? So if you want to, and this is important, especially for the students listening, if you want to prepare for creation, and by the way, you'll see there I asked Gemini to help a little bit. You should always be asking the chatbots to help. But if you want to prepare for creation, these are just three areas, right? Deep focus on the theoretical underpinnings. So now you're thinking about, reasoning, for example, as a possibility. Can we reason? Can these things reason? Develop strong system level programming and software engineering skills. Well, that's a little trickier. I think it's more about architecture, frankly, given that we've already talked about where programming is going to go. Engage in research and development oriented projects. So in labs, all kinds of stuff. Become a demo pilot guru. People that are always playing around with the new ideas. This is all part of creation. This is all part of, I want to focus on the creation of the new tools, the new platforms that enable the applications. I want to focus on the creation, not on the application. Now, if you shift and you want to think about applications, now here we go. It's different. You want to gain deep domain expertise in a specific, in this case, engineering field. Doesn't have to be engineering. I'll talk about that in a moment. Data wrangling, analysis, visualization skills within the domains. Practical application integration. And you'll notice, and other problems. And number 3, which is important. I'll talk about that in a moment. But take a look at that, right? So if you look at sort of preparation for creation versus preparation for applications, they're different lists. They speak directly to your careers. Where do you want to go with this? Where do you want to go with, again, we're trying to respond to the premise that machine learning and generative AI will replace lots of us, including, by the way, professors, right? I mentioned briefly I'm going to be an avatar shortly, but we'll talk about that as well, education being one of those domains. But if we accept the premise, then there's 2 ways to go: create or apply, right? So let's go back and look very briefly again at creation. There's the list. So, and there's lots more things you can do. And by the way, there's another thing we should be talking about here, especially for the students. The educational programs should be directed at these 2 career paths: create or apply. And we should all put pressure. I know I am at my university. We should put pressure on those who control curriculum to make sure that the courses and the opportunities that we're creating, for example, in labs, speak directly to these two career paths because they are quite different, but at the same time, they're very timely. So back to applications, right? So if you look at engineering, so mechanical, electrical, civil, as it's filtered, if you will, through AI. What's happening is, whether it's creation or applications, we're thinking in terms of the new filter is, you know, creating AI, machine learning, generative AI, applying AI, machine learning, generative AI. That's where the pressure should be. That's where we should be thinking about in terms of career paths. I mentioned other, right? So these are domains where you can leverage your engineering expertise. And by engineering, I mean AI engineering, right? These are application areas. So if you look at each one of these, there are already so much displacement going on. And I think, as I mentioned in the beginning of this presentation, I strongly believe we're underestimating this. I don't think we're looking at 5 to 10 years. I will talk to companies, as a consultant, I talk to companies all the time. And um, it's interesting that the higher you are in the leadership hierarchy, and when you get to the C-suite, I won't say it's denial, but it's sort of like, well, we think we have some time to figure this out. And I will say to them, well, how much time do you think you have? And they'll say, well, a decade. And I will say, you're out of your minds to think that it will take a decade for applications in finance. And if you're interested in finance and applying some AI tools, take a look at a tool called FinChat. FINCHAT. Take a look at that tool and see the impact it's already having in finance already. Marketing, are you kidding? Marketing is in the crosshairs. Economics, entertainment. Tyler Perry was going to start a new in Georgia. He was going to expand his his facilities there for making films, and he saw the demonstration of Sora, SORA, and he decided not to do it. It was an $80 million investment, which after seeing this was a year ago, maybe two, he decided that, much of what I do can be replaced by many of these applications. Media, of course, agriculture. I mentioned that, a few minutes ago. The application of these technologies in agriculture is growing exponentially. From silly things, not silly, of course, but picking tomatoes, right? I mean, the weed control, the ability to discover through computer vision what is a weed and what isn't, image recognition, of course, the next step. And then to microdose, the weed killer. And yet you can look all these things up. They're incredible applications. And it's happening now. It's not happening in 5 years. And certainly, if you wait 10 years, the whole field will be changed. Climate change, sustainability, I mentioned that briefly. I think we really need to be thinking about, the applications and the reinvention, reimagination of certain disciplines, like the ones on the list here, that AI will impact in the next 2 to 3, certainly 3 to 5 years. 5 to 10 is naive that it will take that long. It's just dead wrong. And I will often give examples to the companies that I work with, and I'll say, well, what about this and what about this? And almost every time they've never heard of these. They've never heard of the applications. They've never heard of how AI is already impacting their fields, whatever the field may be, whatever their company happens to do. I will ask them, and probably all of you listening know about things like Notebook LM, where you can basically convert information into whatever form you like. I'm telling my students now for their final exams, I don't want paper, I want a podcast. And that has to do with how the form of information and data is changing, right? So those of you who use Notebook LM, and certainly so many of us do, you can upload a PDF and you can search it, you can summarize it, you can turn it into a podcast, you can participate in the podcast. I mean, this is quite different. For those of you who want to capture meetings, you can use tools like Otter, and it will take the meeting, it will summarize. For those of you who want to do presentations, I can tell you that my students, I don't have any students at Villanova that use PowerPoint. They all use either Gamma or Presentation AI. They will have a conversation with the chatbots about what should be in the presentation. The chatbot will then feed its information into Gamma or Presentation. I give these simple examples because I'm trying to emphasize how these tools are already changing the way we do what we do. And those changes I just mentioned are sort of, they're part and parcel of all of these disciplines. So again, if you go back and you think in terms of where do you want to be? Do you want to create or do you want to apply? If you want to create, there's lots of opportunities, but you need to plan for that. If you want to apply, the application is often in these areas where you're going to be finding tools, and I'll get to that in a moment, that can already, excuse me, solve these problems. But without knowing the tools, you will be displaced twice. You'll be displaced by the tools themselves, and you'll be displaced by the people who know the tools. So we'll get to that in a moment. I hope you see the point of that. So I just mentioned, so the preparation on applications, and we talked about that in some detail. Um, I don't know how many of you, and I can share all this with you, of course, but I don't know how many of you are just looking at what's happening with the tool area. I don't know how many of you were thinking in terms of, what I just mentioned 4 or 5 of them. I need to create some images. I need to create some video. I need to embellish a photograph using some AI tools, and there are many of those. I need to do a marketing campaign. I need to write some code. I need to track some companies as an equity analyst. I could go on and on. And there are so many tools. That first link, I hope you're familiar with that. But if you're not, you need to spend a day or two. You need to spend a day or two, and this is in the application area. You need to spend a day or two about what these tools can do. You need to become, if you want to work in the application world, you need to become familiar with these tools. I mentioned only a few of them. There are literally in that first link, and it's updated on almost a daily basis, there are 1,000. And they're organized around, what do you want to do? You want to build a chatbot? I mean, I'll give you one other quick example. I was working with a student, actually it was a graduate student who's also a nurse. And what she did was she took all of the material, my God, the paper material that we give to people about to have surgery. So it was the pre-surgical routine and then the post-op, which you can expect as a patient as a result of the surgery. And she was saying that, of course, people don't read them, people don't have access to them. They have a bunch of frequently asked questions. She simply fed it into a tool, right? And the tool generated a chatbot. Just that simple. Just took the PDFs and uploaded them, right? And I think that's another example of how things are fundamentally changing. This was at a hospital, of course, and now that's how they're using it. They've got the paper, of course, but they've also given everyone a link to that chatbot, which contains all of that same information, but organized around a conversation. So when I talk about fundamental change and the use of some of these tools, that's what I'm talking about. And it goes on and on. So all of us here need to be thinking about the role we want to play. Do we want to create some of these tools broadly defined? Or do we want to apply these tools broadly defined against a variety of domains? Take our engineering skills to create and apply. You can decide what's more fun, what you'd rather do, but those are the opportunities I think we should all be thinking about. Thinking about them right now, and then thinking about them in terms of the things we study, whether it's your majors, whether it's your minors, whether it's your co-majors, or whether it's your independent studies. Think about those things right now, because the impact these things are going to have is not in 10 years, it's 2 to 3, 3 to 5 at most. So it's time. Learn this stuff. Think about how your majors, if your students, will be impacted by AI, because it will be. Think about what impact your careers, because it will. My God, it will. Both sides, create and apply. Again, the working premise is displacement will be widespread. So how are you going to respond? What are you going to create? You're going to apply. Think about how it will impact your lives, not just your careers. And because you don't have a choice. This is one of those cases where, often we'll be thinking about, well, maybe I want to go in a different direction. Maybe I want to think about this a little differently. Maybe I don't want to play in this world. You don't have a choice. You just don't have a choice. I mean, it's amazing how quickly this is happening. I mentioned 10 minutes ago, FinChat. If you have any interest in finance and equity analysis, you've got to play with this thing. Also, one last comment about the applications and these tools. They're so inexpensive. And, we think in terms of, well, some of these things may be too expensive, but if you're in finance or interested in finance, You can get an account with a Bloomberg terminal for about $20,000, or you can use FinChat for about $100 or $200 a year. So that's another aspect of this and the impact it will have. It's not just on its capabilities of displacing knowledge workers, but it's the inexpensiveness of replacing knowledge workers that we also need to be thinking about going forward. So I've probably talked too long already. Thank you. I hope I've got you thinking about what you may want to do in response to this displacement that I strongly believe is inevitable. And some of the responses you can make, I want to create this stuff, I want to apply this stuff. And I think that's a great way to do this, great way to think about your careers, your majors, and your futures. So thanks. Any questions? I'm happy to take any questions. I think we have time for that.
I think there was something in the chat and the question in A. Steve, this is fascinating. What a lot of information in a short amount of time. And I tell you, in IEEE, we talk about a lot of this stuff all the time. I furiously took notes. So thank you for that great list of resources and different things we can do. And again, I have to, right after this conference, I have to get busy with some of these tools and playing with them. They sound fun too. They actually do sound like a lot of fun. I know the image creation and some other things really can be a lot of fun. And I like that you made it a little less scary, maybe in terms of making some decisions here. I think one of the questions I just saw was, I would love to know what a learning path and how to apply AI so I can use it to learn new things I'm clueless about and how to start and proceed.
Well, the first thing I think is to understand the application area, right? So
Mhm.
that's what we call, domain understanding, subject matter expertise, and all of that. I
Mhm.
think what you want to do is reverse engineer a learning path. So first decide what is the problem you're trying to solve, what is
Mhm.
the domain to which you're trying to apply these tools, and then do that kind of reverse engineering to identify the tools, whether they're machine learning tools or generative AI tools. And I think, and some of those websites that I identified, which we will make available to you, they actually do that for you. They actually
Mhm.
organize things in that way. So they'll have things like, do you want to build a chatbot? Or they'll have things about, robotics, and they'll identify the tools. But I think
Mhm.
the best learning path is to think about where you might want to apply these tools. Again, machine learning or generative AI. And then you can better understand the relationship between what the technologies can do and the solutions they offer in that particular domain. If you're just interested in general about the learning path in AI, um, I would, at first you have to decide you want to create or apply, but let's assume you want to apply just for the moment. Then I would begin with all those application domains and the existing relationship between, you don't have to pick one, they're out there, the existing relationship between those domains and the AI tools,
Mhm.
ML or Gen AI. Those
Mhm.
websites will do just that for you. They will list all of these domains and suggest where you can apply what tools are out there and how you apply them. So if you're interested in applications, that's the way I would go as far as the learning path goes. If
Mhm.
it has to do with creation, then the learning path is quite different. Now we're
Mhm.
talking about going much deeper, for example, into data science, much deeper into AI assisted coding, for example.
Mhm.
So the learning paths are quite different if you want to apply, if you want to create or apply.
Mhm. Are you seeing the curriculum change at your university or other? So again, we talked a little bit about this, so again, what we're teaching today, we talked a little bit about this in our pre conversation. So are you seeing some of that change?
Slowly, I'm seeing
Mhm.
the change. So, what's interesting to me is the change is actually faster, and I'm going to probably upset some of the people that are deeper into the engineering disciplines and perhaps deeper into the create
Mhm.
versus apply side. Um, we're seeing changes faster in the apply side than in the create side.
Mhm.
And the fastest change we're seeing in curriculum is in the business schools, surprising. Not necessarily like mine, although we do have AI minor, we have an AI co-major, and we have an
Mhm.
MBA specialization in AI. We have all that. But I just saw recently that the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania, and the way they announced it and described it was they were re-engineering their entire curriculum around AI, their undergraduate
Mhm.
business curriculum
Oh.
around AI.
Mhm.
So MIT's done the same thing. Stanford's
Mhm.
done that. A number of the business schools have now begun to think, okay, AI is kind of changing the world. Now we're still on the apply side, remember. It's
Right.
changing the world. We better have curriculum to change that. That said, Nancy, is it easy? No. Curriculum change at universities is always a slog, as we
Mhm.
all know. There are lots of vested interests out there that want to protect their worlds. So there's that as well.
Mhm.
But I think that it's inevitable. I also think there's another phenomenon going on in business schools. It happens in engineering as well, of course, that we have internships. And the interns, when they come back, go, wait a minute, all they're thinking about is AI, right? I mean, they're not necessarily doing it, as I mentioned in the presentation, but they're really thinking about it. So, and they're asking me, what do you know about AI? What are you doing about AI? And
Mhm.
they're bringing that query back to the curricula and they're saying, we need to change. That's
Yeah.
another kind of outside driver, which is sort of interesting.
Well, I love this presentation AI because I'm always struggling with my presentation. So can't wait to look this tool up because I haven't been using it, and that sounds really exciting. It's, when you're trying to get a lot of stuff done and fit it all in and pull a lot of information together, that sounds pretty exciting in terms on the application side and maybe how it will make that easier and faster to do. Um, One other question that came in was they were wondering why medical imaging was listed on the at-risk fields. What do you think about that?
At risk,
At
well,
risk.
meaning that, well, what I mean by that is that this partnership between AI and medical imaging has already begun.
Mhm.
And it's a strong partnership. Remember, I made the point about you assist, you partner, or you lead. Right now, I would argue that medical imaging and AI are partners.
Mhm.
And there's a ton of research coming in on the effectiveness. Many tests are being done on the effectiveness of that partnership and how medical imaging is going to become maybe a lead in certain areas like certain kinds of cancer, breast cancer in
Mhm.
particular. The data suggests that it improves the diagnosticity of these cancers. So that's one of the areas that, if you look at a lot of the research in AI, is considered a kind of well-bounded area, if you will,
Mhm.
that we can model and will improve.
Mhm.
Radiologists, to the former question, are not always thrilled about this, but that said, there are many radiologists who are very accepting of this partnership.
I
So
think that's
medical
one of the ones
imaging,
you see that the technologies and the tools are being developed many years. A couple of you step back 5 years, and now they're a little bit more mature, maybe in terms of the tools that are available because we've been using them for a bit.
much more mature.
Mhm.
And I
Mhm.
think that maturity, and many of us are familiar with so-called maturity models. I think that's one of the areas where there's great optimism, and I think well deserved. So
Mhm.
medical imaging is always on the short list of domains that will be at least assisted partner with, and perhaps at some point in certain areas, maybe displacement will occur. I
Maybe.
believe that, by the way. So I like
You
the
don't
domain. Like
you like
meaning I think it's well bounded.
and you don't think it will be totally displaced. Maybe some of the positions, but not totally displaced.
Well, okay, I'm hesitating here because I think certain areas there will be total displacement
Mhm.
of medical imaging. I think some won't. I think certain kinds of diagnoses we will want to, and maybe it should be the case that there are radiologists looking over the shoulders of these tools. But as I said, the working premise is that many of these domains will be impacted in ways that we're underestimating today.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
at least strong partners, if not leaders. Leader to me means displacement. So yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if in certain kinds of medical imaging that physicians are replaced at
Mhm.
some point. I don't think we're talking 20 years either. I
Mhm.
think we have other issues around that too, which is, legal issues and issues around just people may not want to hear from a machine, obviously. But I think that the partnership is well underway and we'll see where it goes.
Interesting. I know we have one of our keynote on Friday is about medical and AI. So it'd be interesting. If you're really interested in that, you should tune back in on Friday for that.
That will
Um,
be interesting.
Another question: as AI automates more cybersecurity tasks, how can we ensure smart grid defenses remain effective without over relying on automated decision making?
That's a double-edged sword, isn't it? Good
Mhm.
question. I think the double-edged sword is that AI is, good AI, bad AI, right? So, cybersecurity is one of those areas where AI can do a number of things. In fact, if you look at the investments that are being made by the cybersecurity companies, they will tell you it's nothing about it. It's always AI. We're doing AI. We're doing AI. But at the same time, those who are trying to penetrate networks are also using AI. That's going to be a battle of the bots. And, I don't know. I mean, I don't think anyone knows how that's going to play out. We do know that AI is going to be one of the major tools, if not the major tool that we use in cybersecurity. Um, I'm one of the people that believe that this is never going to be a perfect world, no matter what tools you have.
Mhm.
There are smart people using the same tools. So I think it's always going to be a kind of iterative battle that, some quarters, some months, some years AI wins, good AI wins, and some bad AI wins. I don't think we'll ever be in a situation. There may be disagreement among the audience here. I don't think we ever get to perfect cybersecurity. I don't think. I think zero tolerance is a silly goal. I know the auditors have now their heads have just exploded. But I think that this is going to be a tough challenge for us for a very long time.
Well, I think as hard as someone works to make it perfect, somebody else works harder to break it.
Yeah,
So that
yeah, with the
unfortunately,
same kind of technology.
yeah, exactly. They use the same thing to try to break it. So
Yeah.
that's scary. Some person wrote in here that they recently worked on power optimization project where we're using machine learning and multiple linear regression. And ask, in your experience, how are traditional ML methods like regression still relevant in industry, especially with deep learning?
Great question as well. I think some problems that I mean, when you think about supervised learning and you think about well-bounded kinds of, we call that, pejoratively weak AI. I think many of the problems that are really ready for AI, so to speak, are very simple problems. I mentioned one of them, just approving or denying a loan. I mean, you don't. What I want to say is you don't need overkill. I think this is an important point. I mean, there are other ways of doing things for sure, but when you have a well-bounded problem and you have a simple solution, why not automate it? And and I've always been one. In fact, there's all kinds of research on selecting the right algorithm for the right problem. There are so-called algorithmic cheat sheets, which if you haven't seen those, they're great. They're fun. They will tell you, ask you a few questions about your problem, and then say, okay, here's the algorithm you should use. I just think that simple works. I think as you get more complex, then I think you think about not just the algorithms, but also the computational architecture. So I think the question is well founded, but I'm still a strong believer in, if it's simple, keep it, the old KISS principle.
Keep it simple. I guess even in an ML, AI, generative AI world, keep it simple. I might still be the one principle that exists that
Absolutely. But
seems based
architectures
on.
will change over time. And
Mm,
these things, so the automation of these things will change architecturally over time, which I think
mhm.
is the purpose of the question.
Interesting. So, other question: how do we utilize AI in an ethical way?
Oh, God.
Saying, I have some worries about how many generative AI bots rely on the work of people that did not consent to being in the data sets.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I did not talk about the ethics of all this. I kind of wish I had. In the
Mhm,
courses I teach, we talk a lot about that. Um, this displacement issue is going to be with us. I mean, it's been with us before, right? There are lots
mhm,
of industries that were disrupted because of technology, and I think that that's inevitable. I think the larger question is, what do you do about people that are displaced? Um, and especially if my argument is correct, that displacement will happen faster than people are
mhm,
predicting. I personally believe there's an ethical obligation to do something about the people that are displaced.
mhm,
I think that has to do with, and here I'm going to get very controversial, it has to do with something, I mean, government support is relevant here, and I think important. If you want to fast forward 30 or 40 years, we might think in terms of universal basic incomes and things like that, if so many people are displaced. But um, it's a great question, and I don't think we have the answer to all of these questions.
mhm,
Um, I think we have to sort of feel our way through this. But I'm one that believes
mhm,
personally that there is an ethical obligation to address the people who are displaced,
mhm,
and especially those who are displaced very quickly. You could extend that to lots of people that are displaced for a variety of reasons. And I don't want
Mhm.
to get political here, but it's happening not just because of AI, but it's happening because of Doge and the
Mhm.
things that are arbitrarily being selected as needing to be people need to be displaced. So I think we need to be more careful
Mhm.
about this, very careful about this, and we need to be thinking about this. I mean, there are fields, as I briefly mentioned, like marketing, image creation, video creation, which will be impacted severely over the next 3 to 5 years. And that's the window I use with my students when
Mhm.
they do some kind of presentation, like a FinChat, for example, as I mentioned a couple of times. Where will this be in 3 to 5 years? Where will Sora be in 3 to 5 years? Right. And I think, where will Synthesia be in terms of avatars and the replacement of lots of people who read news, for example? Um, and they'll be incredibly powerful. So therefore, we have an obligation to deal with that displacement from by these incredibly powerful tools.
Yeah, I think why we themed this conference responsible AI, because again, AI does come with responsibilities, and I think to keep the human side in as a tool or an application in terms of what we do to kind of serve us, not be served in a.
Yeah, there's some. So one of the arguments, it's not really an argument, one of the positions that people state, well, if AI can replace certain kinds of menial tasks, things that are repetitive,
Mhm,
routinized, which is
mhm,
all good, then that would free them up for higher level tasks. I think we need to be spending some time on defining what they are, right? What are those higher level tasks, right? So you can imagine, for example, in some areas, you move from tactics to strategies. Tactics
mhm,
is now handled by AI, but now we're going to have people thinking more about strategic applications,
right.
strategic goals, for example. And that's fine. That may be another way of addressing this, freeing people from the more mundane routine tasks so they can do other things. That said, I think we need to be careful, though, about making sure we define what they are
Mhm.
and making sure they too are not vulnerable to the power of these tools.
Interesting, because I know, and I think we can have do we have time for one last question. And we talked about this a little bit briefly about in education. They said if a professor is now an AI agent, what is even a university anymore?
What a terrific question to end on. I have some students that are saying to me, well, if you're building a syllabus with AI and
Mhm,
you're identifying our projects and our readings with AI, and you're communicating some lectures in AI using, for example, an avatar,
mhm.
what do I need you for? And more interestingly, perhaps, is why is tuition so high? I mean, I did an article in Forbes magazine, and I can share it with everyone on what happens with higher education and AI. I'd love to share that with everyone because it talks about how the roles change. In fact, I talk about what's a student, what's a professor, what's a curriculum, what's a project, what's a syllabus. I mean, these are all new questions that AI is forcing us to answer. I mentioned briefly, I'm going to be doing a course where the first 2 or 3 lectures are going to be me as I'll use Synthesia, not to plug the company, but I'll build an avatar of myself. And I will, the beauty of that from my point of view is I can populate that with content on the fly, right? And it's me, I'll send you a link and it'll be me talking about something at 3 o'clock in the morning because I just read about Manus, which is a new chatbot, or DeepSeek. And that's like really current as opposed to doing a
Mhm.
video, for example.
Sure.
Um, which so there's all kinds of great things about this, but what a great question. I mean, I think
It
we don't know the answer. I'd be happy to share that article with anybody who wants it.
Thanks. Well, we'll take this. We'll get your slides, a lot of your resources. We'll make sure people can watch this on demand, and we'll make sure we get a lot of those things, Steve, because I love to share that with others. And again, I want to go back. I was telling you, I was frantically making notes, not just for myself, but for my daughter, who again is going to be focusing on these 3 to 5 years. So, she's just starting in her career. So we'll be facing many of these changes. So it's exciting time and it's an interesting time. But again, it's the time I think you have to be very clever and think about what you want to do, because it's going to happen, like you said, going to happen anyway. The future is going to happen anyway, and it's closer than you think. Well, thank you so much for sharing all of your insights and information with us today. It's been fascinating. I've enjoyed it myself very much, and I know our audience has lots of great questions. And we appreciate your time, and thank you for sharing with us.
Absolutely. And I will share more things as I mentioned if anyone is interested.
Yeah, I'm sure we will be. Have a great day.
Thank you. You too.